You are watching Bygone Treasures, your source for everything history and geopolitics, now in session. From 1858 until India and Pakistan gained their independence in 1947, the Indian subcontinent was directly ruled by the British. This period is known as the British Raj. Following a mass sepoy troop rebellion in 1857 because of widespread mistrust and discontent with the company's leadership, which forced the British to re-evaluate their approach to Indian administration, the Raj took over the subcontinent from the British East India Company. The British government imposed direct rule and seized the company's assets. Although the goal of the Raj was to encourage Indian involvement in administration, the inability of the Indian people to decide their destiny without British approval fueled a growing national independence movement. Even though Europeans had long placed high importance on commerce with India, the lengthy route between them was fraught with potential roadblocks and middlemen's obfuscations, making trade risky, unreliable and costly. This was particularly true after the ancient Silk Road was almost cut off by the fall of the Mughal Empire and the emergence of the Ottoman Empire. Because of the distance involved, merchants had to erect fortified posts as Europeans, headed by the Portuguese, started to investigate sea navigation routes to avoid middlemen. The East India Company, which was first created in India by securing permission from local authorities to possess land, fortify its holdings and conduct trade duty-free in mutually advantageous relationships, was given this role by the British. The company's geographical paramountcy started when it got embroiled in war, excluding competing European businesses before toppling the Bengali Nawab and installing a puppet in 1757. When Warren Hastings moved the Nawab's administrative headquarters to Calcutta, now Kolkata, in the 1770s, he firmly solidified the company's hold on Bengal. Bengal came under the indirect authority of the British government at around the same time as the British Parliament started to regulate the East India Company via a series of India Acts. The company's power was expanded throughout the subcontinent over the following 8 decades by several wars, treaties and annexations, which left the majority of India at the mercy of British merchants and administrators. Mangal Pandey, an East India Company sepoy Indian soldier, attacked British commanders at the Barrackpore military camp in late March 1857. In early April, the British arrested him and put him to death. Sepoy troops at Meerut later in April rejected cartridges that had been lubricated with pig and cow lard, which are prohibited for food by Muslims and Hindus respectively, because they had heard a rumour that they would have to bite into them to prepare them for use in their new Enfield rifles. They were imprisoned, fettered and sentenced to lengthy prison terms as punishment. Their fellow soldiers were so angered by this treatment that they rose on May 10th, shot their British officers and marched to Delhi, where no European troops were present. The local sepoy garrison joined the Meerut men there, and by dark a riotous army had ostensibly reinstated the elderly retired Mughal monarch Bahadur Shah II. Delhi's capture served as a focal point and established the framework for the entire rebellion, which subsequently extended across northern India. None of the prominent Indian princes joined the mutineers, except for Nana Sahib, the adopted son of the overthrown Maratha Peshwa, and the Mughal Emperor and his sons. Officially, the mutiny ended on July 8, 1859. The Indian government was immediately cleaned up as a result of the revolt. The British government decided to administer India directly and disbanded the East India Company. While this had little practical significance, it did remove the unimaginative commercialism that had persisted in the Court of Directors and brought a more personal touch to the governance. The mutiny's financial problems prompted a modern restructuring of the Indian government's financial structure. There was also a significant restructuring of the Indian Army. The start of the policy of consultation with Indians was another important outcome of the revolt. The Legislative Council of 1853, which was exclusively composed of Europeans, acted haughtily as though it were a legitimate parliament. Many believe that the issue had been sparked in part by a failure to communicate with Indian opinion. Consequently, an Indian-nominated element was added to the newly formed council in 1861. Roads, railroads, telegraphs, irrigation and other public works projects went uninterrupted. In fact, some were prompted by the idea of their potential for troop transportation in an emergency. However, insensitive social policies implemented by the British that had an impact on Hindu society ended suddenly. Lastly, there was the impact of the rebellion on the Indian populace. The attempt by traditional society to protest the alien forces that were coming in had failed. For the most part, the princes and other natural leaders had shown themselves incapable or had distanced themselves from the rebellion. Since then, there has been less genuine hope for a return to the past or for the West to be excluded. A powerful middle class with a strong feeling of Indian nationalism arose from the breakdown of the traditional Indian social structure, which was finally replaced by a westernized class system. The East India Company's incompetence was largely to blame for the revolt. The Government of India Act, approved by Parliament on August 2, 1858, gave the Crown of Britain control over India instead of the company. The remaining powers of the Merchant Company were given to the Secretary of State for India, a member of the British Cabinet, who would oversee the India office in London. The Secretary would receive assistance and advice, particularly in financial matters, from the Council of India, which at first had 15 Britons, 7 of whom were chosen from the previous company's board of directors, and 8 of whom were appointed by the monarchy. A new British policy of unwavering support for native princes and non-intervention in matters of religious belief or worship within British India was revealed on November 1, 1858, when Lord Canning, who ruled from 1856 to 62, announced Queen Victoria's proclamation to the princes, chiefs and peoples of India. Princes were allowed to adopt whatever heirs they wanted as long as they all pledged unwavering loyalty to the British Crown, reversing Lord Dalhousie's pre-war objective of political union through princely state annexation. Queen Victoria added the title Empress of India to her regality in 1876 at Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli's request. For the full 9 decades of Crown rule, over 560 enclaves of autocratic princely rule survived, scattered throughout British India as a result of the British fear of another mutiny and their subsequent resolve to support Indian states as natural breakwaters against any future tidal wave of revolt, a dread of recurrent insurrection which many Britons thought had been sparked by traditional Muslim and Hindu reactions against the secularizing advances of utilitarian positivism and the preaching of Christian missionaries, gave rise to the new policy of religious non-intervention. From the East India Company's Hindu Widows Remarriage Act of 1856 to the Crown's Meek Age of Consent Act of 1891, which essentially increased the age of statutory rape for consenting Indian brides from 10 to 12, British liberal socio-religious reform thus stalled for more than 30 years. India had the largest imperial bureaucracy in the world and a more centralised paternal tyranny from 1858 to 1909. Each of the 5 regular members was assigned to oversee a different department of Kolkata's government, including the Home, Revenue, Military, Finance and Law departments. The Indian Councils Act of 1861 converted the Viceroy's Executive Council into a tiny cabinet operating on the portfolio system. The head of the military served as an extraordinary member of that council. Tea, indigo and coffee were the 3 most significant plantation industries during that time. In the 1850s, British tea plantations were established in the Assam hills of northern India, and around 20 years later in the Nilgiri hills in southern India. Around 3,000 tons of tea were produced by more than 300 tea plantations by 1871, which occupied more than 30,000 planted acres, 12,000 hectares. China's tea in London was replaced by India's tea harvest, which was big enough to send 68,500 tons to Britain by 1900. Despite the Blue Mutiny violent disturbances by cultivators in 1859 to 1860, which threatened to wipe out Bengal and Bihar's thriving indigo industry, India continued to export indigo to European markets until the end of the 19th century, when synthetic colours rendered the natural product useless. Southern India saw a boom in coffee plants between 1860 and 1879, but disease devastated the crop and caused Indian coffee to drop for 10 years. From 1858 to 1947, the British Raj governed India, taking over after the 1857 Sepoy Mutiny ended East India Company rule. While the Raj modernised infrastructure and administration, it suppressed Indian autonomy, sparking a nationalist movement that led to independence in 1947. This has been Bygone Treasures. Don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment below to share your thoughts.